Now, the new Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has promised to engage constructively with the government as it tackles coronavirus, but he still has some criticisms of their approach and is today calling for some urgent talks to ensure Parliament returns as planned from its Easter break. And Sir Keir joins us now from North London. Thank you for being with us today. I just want to start off looking on the death rates that we've seen from coronavirus. On Friday, the UK reported 980 people dying in hospital after testing positive for COVID-19. Yesterday, the figure was 917. I mean, that's a higher daily total than any we've seen posted in Spain or Italy. We just heard from Alok Sharma there saying the government took the right steps at the right time. Do you think they did?
Well, I think those figures are really alarming. They are high, and we need to remember that behind every figure is a family shaken to its foundation because it's lost a family member, and it can't even carry out the most poignant of ceremonies, a funeral in the way that they like. So they are alarming. What we all want, the whole country wants, the Labour Party wants, the government wants, is to see that figure flatten and hopefully start going down. The figure for hospital admissions, the tragic death figures, we want to see them going down. And whatever measures are necessary now for the government to take, whether that's increasing capacity in the NHS or whether that's lockdown, to get those figures down, we will support it. Of course there will be questions in due course about what happened when, but the most important thing is we do have that unity of purpose, which is to try to get those figures down. And we will support the government in that. We will ask challenging questions, difficult questions about where we go next, about what's happened in the past. But I think the whole nation desperately wants those figures to go down. Every day we see the figures, we shudder at the thought of the families that are affected by it.
We saw what had happened in Italy. At a time when 200 people were dying in Italy, tens of thousands of people were going to the Cheltenham Festival to watch horse racing. Were the government too slow to act?
Well, there are going to be difficult questions about whether the government was too slow, but now is not the time for those. The national effort has to be about reducing those numbers. And as I say, that's increasing the capacity of the NHS. It's about social distancing and following the government's guidance. That is what we all have to be focused on. But there is then the critical question, and it is about planning, the issue you raised, which is what happens next? Because we know pretty well that a vaccine won't be ready for 12 months or so. If the figures start to go down, what will happen in the next 12 months? And that's why I've asked for Parliament to be recalled. That's why I've asked for the government to tell us what the exit strategy is, because we need to know in that 12 months what is going to happen. There are various possibilities, but the government needs to set out its exit strategy because it needs to plan for those 12 months. It needs to do that planning now. It needs to be open about it. That's why it's so important that Parliament is sitting.
OK, let's take both of those points in turn. Firstly, on Parliament being recalled, it's pretty clear that you want Parliament to come back after the Easter recess. And I'm sure that many things can be done remotely. But at the same time, when those death toll figures are so high, surely the priority should be slowing the spread of the virus. Are you not worried that recalling Parliament might risk that?
Well, it's very important in a crisis like this that Parliament is sitting so that decisions can be properly scrutinised, so that the concerns of constituents can be put to relevant ministers. Now, and that's why I'm saying Parliament must be recalled as soon as possible. Now, how we're recalled and how we sit is obviously a question we're going to have to discuss, because physically it's impossible to see how we can sit in the usual way. We're going to have to think about working differently. In New Zealand, they've set up a special select committee to look at coronavirus. It's chaired by the Leader of the Opposition, and it operates on a daily basis using technology so people can see Parliament at work. That may be one possibility, but that's why today I've asked for urgent talks to come up with an arrangement for Parliament to sit so MPs can do their job.
I just want to interrupt you here. I just want to interrupt you here because I am getting a notification now that a spokesperson for the Leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg, has confirmed that Parliament will return on the 21st of April. So that's something I'm guessing that you must welcome.
Well, I'm pleased about that. I still want to have the urgent talks because it's got to sit effectively. I don't see how it can sit in the ordinary way, and I think the sooner we can scrutinise decisions, the better. You've seen just this weekend a real issue about protective equipment, with the government saying one thing and the front line saying another. Now, I don't doubt that the government's doing everything it can to get the protective equipment to the people that need it as quickly as possible. And I don't pretend it's not a very difficult thing to do. But there is a mismatch. Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, said on Friday that there was enough equipment. The front line says otherwise. The Medical Association did a survey last week. Doctors on the front line in high-risk areas are saying 50% of them are saying they haven't got the equipment they need. Kingston Hospital yesterday said they're running out of gowns. So this is a difficult exercise. I understand the government's trying to rise to the challenge here. But there's a mismatch, and that's the sort of thing that Parliament needs to pursue through individual MPs putting the points to ministers. We need accountability in this.
Talking about the row over personal protective equipment, something that clearly many people feel very strongly about. We've all heard difficult stories of people on the front line. The Royal College of Nursing has issued guidance to say that if nurses feel they haven't got that protective equipment that they need, masks, goggles, gowns, then they should effectively refuse to treat people with coronavirus. Is that the right thing to do?
Well, they're in a position to give guidance to those in their association, and they should give that guidance. The most important thing is that that protective equipment is there, and that's why we're pushing the government on this. This is the sort of opposition I said that we would put forward. Constructive. I want the government to get this right. I want to support the government to get this right, but we need to point out the difference between what they're saying and the position on the front line so that it can be fixed. Nobody wants anybody to be put in this position. Key workers on the front line are taking risks, and they're entitled to the protection that they need through the equipment. So I challenge the government hard on this, not just to score a point, but actually to say, what can we do to put this right? If there's a problem, let's fix it. Let's identify what the cause of the concern is, and let's fix it. Parliament, of course, can play a part in this, because individual MPs have had lots and lots of examples of what's going on in their patch, in their constituency. Bringing that together allows the government to see where the problem is so that it can fix it.
Yesterday, Priti Patel, asked about protective equipment, said, "I'm sorry if people feel there have been failings." I asked Alex Sharma just a few moments ago if he would apologise for the fails to get that to the front line, and he didn't do so. Should the government be apologising to frontline workers?
I think it would be smart of the government to acknowledge that their ambition for the equipment to be where it should be in the right quantity at the right time isn't being matched, and probably just to apologise for that and get on with it. But I think the whole nation wants this fixed and wants to move forward. So I'm trying to resist calls for apologies or criticising past decisions. What we need is, what's the problem? Where are the real issues, and what can we do to fix it? And as I said last week when I became leader of the Labour Party, I will work with the government on this. We will support them in trying to get this right. We point out the problem in order that it can be fixed.
OK, so what does that mean, saying that you want to work constructively with the government? Does that simply mean that you're not going to try and score party political points, you'll go to the odd briefing, or does that actually mean that you're prepared to join a government of national unity or do something actually radical and different?
It's that we will be constructive. And so what I've said is this: we will work with the government. I spoke to the Prime Minister last Saturday about this. I said, we will work with you. We will have the courage to support you where that's the right thing to do, increasing capacity in the NHS, having the restrictions, the lockdown. We support you in that because we know what you're trying to achieve, and we will say so. And that's why I've said repeatedly, follow government advice. We support the government on this. But we also will ask the difficult, searching questions where we think there have been mistakes or things haven't happened quickly enough. But the purpose, and this is the important bit, the purpose of that challenge is not to score party political points. It's not opposition for the sake of opposition. It's to identify those mistakes, identify when the government's going too slowly, so that something can be done about it through constructive criticism and working with the government where we can do so.
I want to ask you about the exit strategy, because this is what lots of people will be looking at, the forward planning, the strategy going forward, because many people will be thinking, look, it's easy to criticise the government for not being straight about having an exit strategy. It's easy to do what you're doing, which is to say the government needs to lay out what the exit strategy should be. The difficulty is that many of the things that people hoped would give us a way out of the crisis are simply a very, very long way off. The antibody tests are not good enough. A vaccine is going to be months away at best. You don't have a magic solution either, do you?
Sophie, the position is this. We want the number of admissions to hospital and the tragic deaths to go down, to flatten and go down. And I desperately hope that's going to happen. The whole nation wants that to happen. So that's where we are now. We all know that a vaccine, which is the sort of end exit strategy, is probably 12 months away. So the question is, what happens in that intervening 12 months? Now, I'm pushing the government on this because we need to plan for it. We can't just arrive at it without a plan. There are a number of possibilities. You could have mass community testing and tracing. That is one possibility. You could have shielding of the very vulnerable. You could have the social distancing being turned on or off, if you like, and these could be used together. But which of it is it? And the reason this matters is because, firstly, we need to have the trust of the public that they know what's going to happen in these 12 months. People are really frightened for their health, frightened for the economy, so they need to know. But also we need to plan. If the plan is mass community testing and then tracing, that tells us we need to ramp up testing far beyond what the government's already promised, if that's the right route. So I'm pushing the government on this because what I don't want to happen is in a number of weeks we arrive at the situation and we haven't got a clear plan.
OK. Now, coronavirus, of course, feels all-consuming at the minute, but this is my first interview with you since you became the leader of the Labour Party, and I am quite keen to reflect a little bit on where you plan to take the party at this time of national emergency. Now, in your acceptance speech, you talked about reconnecting with the country, and you said, where that requires change, we will change. Where that requires to rethink, we will rethink. So where specifically will Labour change under your leadership?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is to acknowledge the scale of the task that we face. We lost in December very badly. It was a devastating loss, and there was no good that came out of that loss. But we didn't just lose the last general election, we lost 4 in a row. So, of course, things need to change.
So where are you going to change?
My first task is to unite our party. It's the oldest saying in politics that divided parties don't win elections. And that's because it's true. So we've got to unite our party. I was very pleased to be able to win the leadership last week. And now I need to bring the party together to be an effective opposition. So that's the first task. We then need to be unrelentingly focused on the next general election. I just want to come in, if I may.
Yeah. Because you say you want to change the party, and you say that there's a huge challenge. So far, you've just said that you want to unite the party and you want to focus on the next election. I mean, that's obvious, isn't it? What's the big idea? What are you actually going to do to change?
Well, the first thing I did was to be absolutely clear about things like anti-Semitism. And that's why I issued an apology in my acceptance speech, the first opportunity that I had to our Jewish communities. And that's why I've already had meetings with Jewish leaders in the past week. So absolutely demonstrating change. I then put together a very talented, diverse shadow cabinet from across the whole of the United Kingdom to demonstrate that we've got the strength and talent in depth across the Labour Party to take us forward. Obviously, where we go next is now framed by coronavirus, because the arguments about our economy are going to be different, and the arguments about how we value people, frankly, are going to be different. We can't go out every Thursday on our doorsteps and clap for our key workers who are keeping us going in this period, and then at the end of this, return to business as usual. So the job of the Labour Party is to spell out that vision of a better society when we're through coronavirus.
OK, well, let's talk a bit about that vision, because you're right, of course, to say that all of the old certainties are going to be ripped up because of coronavirus. There's going to be a crippling economic cost as well. You've said that you can't have another decade of austerity. But there will be austerity, won't there, of some form. That's the reality, because we'll be paying this off for a generation.
There are choices about how you deal with debt and deficit, and this government, going back to 2010 for the last decade, has chosen austerity. That has caused great harm to many communities and many individuals across the United Kingdom. What we can't have is another decade of austerity on top of this decade of austerity. Just look what it's done to the health service, our public services, social care, all of these areas that are now so being relied on have been cut for 10 years.
What would you do instead then? Would you raise taxes rather than cut down spending?
Well, we may well have to raise taxes, of course, but you're asking me a question that nobody can realistically answer because we don't yet know what the damage to the economy is going to be. We do know it's going to be damaged. We can see that already. We don't know, because we don't know how long this is going to go on, quite what the damage will be. So pretending now that I can tell you what will be needed in 2024 is not something that I'm going to do. But it is clear that we're going to have to take a different approach. Lots of people who are key workers today, going in today, as they've been going in every day, have been underpaid and undervalued for years. That cannot go on. There's got to be a fundamental difference going forward.
OK, now you completed your shadow cabinet reshuffle last week, and you booted out quite a lot of Jeremy Corbyn's old allies: Richard Burgon, Dawn Butler, John Trickett, Ian Lavery, John McDonnell, Diane Abbott have left the stage. I got the sense when I last interviewed Jeremy Corbyn that he was angling for a job in the shadow cabinet. That wasn't forthcoming either. Is this the end of Corbynism?
Well, I've never accepted these labels based on an individual. What I'm trying to do is build a team, a diverse team from different parts of the party across the country that can take us on the journey from here to where we need to be at the next general election. And what I said in my election campaign, and what I say to my top team now, is don't look to the past for people to cling to. We've got to do the thinking here. We've got to build the policy build and the project build and the strategy to take us into the next general election. So the duty and responsibility is on us now to do what's necessary over the next 4 years, not to look backwards at other individuals, whoever they may be.
A key part of the Jeremy Corbyn project as well was the campaign group Momentum, who really backed his leadership to the hilt. When you were elected, they tweeted to say, in this new era, Momentum will play a new role, will hold Keir to account and make sure he keeps his promises. And on the show last weekend, Alan Johnson referenced that tweet and said to me, I'm afraid there's no sign they'd buried the weapons and have dedicated themselves to unity. And as a result, Labour under your leadership needs to purge ourselves of the far-left insurgents of Momentum. Is he right?
Look, what I've said to our membership is this. Whether you voted for me or not, I will represent you, I will listen to you, and I'll bring our party together. I want to hear all the voices in the Labour Party. Of course I should be held to account for what I've said and what I do. Of course I should. That's absolutely right. But what I want to do is to unify our party. We've got 580,000 members. That's the biggest political party in Europe. We need to pull that together as a really strong fighting force. So I will talk to everybody within our party about how we do that.
OK, and just finally, because we're running out of time, I'm quite interested to find a bit more about yourself, the new leader of the Labour Party, blank canvas, big mandate to do what you want. Now, you went from grammar school to Oxford, you then became Director of Public Prosecutions, head of the CPS, elected as an MP in 2015. 5 years later, you're leading the Labour Party. It's a very impressive CV. It's also quite an establishment CV, though. Do you think some people may feel it's time for an insurgent?
Well, along the way, I've been a human rights lawyer fighting cases across the world against governments and the establishment, as you put it. So I don't buy into this, you're either the establishment or you're not. What I've focused on is what needs to get done and how do I get it done. But I've spent many, many years fighting the establishment, as you put it, whether that's for trade unionists, whether that's people on death row across the world, you name it. I've been there fighting on the front line with them. Of course, I've also worked in the Crown Prosecution Service. I also worked with the police service in Northern Ireland on implementing some of the Good Friday proposals. What I've focused on is not, am I the establishment or not the establishment? What's the job that needs to be done? What's the wrong that needs to be righted? And that's the focus I will take leading the Labour Party, which is how do we get the Labour Party, a most incredible force for good, from where it is now into a position where we can serve our country again in government.
OK, thank you very much for being on the programme this morning. Keir Starmer there, the new leader of the Labour Party.